Hello and welcome to Curator with a Camera. I'm Anthony Coulls, Senior Curator at the National Railway Museum, and today we're going to look at George Jackson Churchward's masterpiece, Lode Star. In 1892, the Great Western Railway said goodbye to Brunel's broad gauge, the 7 foot and 1/4 inch, and their main line was entirely relayed by then to the standard gauge of 4 feet 8.5 inches. Now this paved the way for a modernisation programme like no other railway company had done in the UK. This meant they had a unified main line, standard gauge throughout the system, and they wanted to run faster and heavier and longer trains than had previously been possible. It took a while to start to look at the engineering of the locomotives that would pull those trains. A dynasty of 19th century locomotive engineers was replaced by George Jackson Churchward. George Jackson Churchward was not averse to innovation and experimentation. He took ideas from around the world and put them together in various locomotives to try out some of those ideas. He tried the taper boiler, the Belpaire firebox, piston valves, and in 1906 he was given permission by the Great Western Railway to buy 3 compound locomotives from France. George Jackson Churchward's answer to the French compound locomotives was number 40 North Star. The success of number 40 North Star was such that Churchward had permission from the Great Western Railway directors to then take that into a production locomotive, the Star class. North Star was pioneered in 1906. The Star class of 460 locomotives followed on as a design later that year and went into production in 1907. And the sole survivor of that type is the machine behind us here, Lode Star 4003, built in 1907. Let's have a look at some of the bits that make it work. So this is the house style of the Great Western Railway as set by Churchward. But what is it really that makes this engine stand apart, that makes it the precursor of all Great Western locomotive development, certainly on the express passenger side for the next 20 years or more? Well, it's what's happening down here. You're combining a very efficient boiler, a taper boiler with a Belpaire firebox for maximum steam production and efficiency, with a really special 4-cylinder drive. So what is happening under this box at the front of the loco, this casing, under the smoke box? There are 2 steam cylinders and sets of piston valves under this casing. And they are just here within the frames. There's the piston rod from one of the 2 inside cylinders, and they drive the first axle on the loco. They are operated by a set of what's called Valchart's valve gear, and that Valchart's valve gear is actuating the valves through these rods up here, but then through these rocker arms, the valve gear in there is operating the valves on the outside cylinders. So there's only 2 sets of valve gear on a 4-cylinder engine. That's really important because it's reducing the weight of the engine, so it's allowing more efficiency. It's also reducing the amount of wear and maintenance, because this is an incredibly precise and complex machine. On an engine like this, there are hundreds of oiling points because you have 2 steam engines on the outside, 2 steam engines on the inside, making up the drive of the locomotive. On a Great Western engine such as this, lubrication is really important. It's a total loss system, but you don't want to lose it all in one go. So the Great Western Railway came up with using corks in the top of the oiling points, and the cork fits in there. So you oil up your fitting and then put a cork in the top so it doesn't get everywhere and make a mess. However, if you do that with a straight cork, then you airlock it and oil cannot flow by gravity or capillary action down into the bearings. So we have this innovation with a cork. It has a reed up the middle of it, and the reed allows the cork to breathe, air to get in, and the oil to do its job. People who were the detractors of the Great Western Railway and its innovations quite often joked that if one of these engines fell into the sea or into the river, then it would float and maybe head off to France because there was so much cork on it. Don't think that ever happened, but quite a nice story nonetheless. All the valve gear is between the frames on this machine. So there are two sets of valve gear working 4 cylinders. However, it is a maintenance nightmare with an inside valve geared engine because you've got to get in between the frames to do it. You've got to get in between the frames to clean it, maintain it, sort it out. So it looks great, but it isn't necessarily the best thing in the world. But it's the design that the Great Western Railway stuck with for all of their mainline tender engines, all of their tank engines until the late 1940s. And these were really effective locos at the time. There were 73 of them built, and they ran from London, Midlands, Wales into the West Country. And they were really well engineered, very well put together, so much so that questioning the cost of these machines compared to the equivalent for the London North Western Railway. So the wheel arrangement here, the 460, but the 460 wheel arrangement wasn't restricted to the Great Western. The London North Western Railway built a series of 460 engines, and it came to the director's attention that the London North Western Railway was building 3 of their 460 type for the cost of 2 of these Great Western engines. And the questions went into the engineer, and the directors asked George Jackson Churchward why his engines were so expensive. And he said, well, because one of mine will pull 2 of their bloody things backwards. And that's a quote from George Jackson Churchward, why his engines were so well built. We talk about the house style of the Western engine, the Great Western engine. There is this wonderful nameplate, Lode Star. The first 10 engines were named after stars. They then went in sequences. Some were named after queens, some were named after abbeys, some were named after princesses. They were known as the stars throughout. And there is the brass beading of the letters which you see on all Great Western named engines. And then to the top of the boiler, the top feed and safety valve bonnet, that brass safety valve bonnet made by coppersmiths and brassmiths in Swindon Works. And Great Western engines which don't have domes. We've talked about domes on several other Curators with a camera, with the high point of the boiler where the steam is collected. Western engines don't have it, but they have the top feed, and what the top feed does there, under those sort of shoulders, the green shoulders, is where the water goes into the boiler at the highest point to feed, and then the safety valves, the valves for letting excess pressure out of the boiler, are hidden beneath that bonnet itself. This engine is summed up as Edwardian elegance. It doesn't have to look this good. It's a tool to do a job. And those cheaper L&WR engines, they were black. They had no fripperies, they had no ornaments on them at all. It was pretty much the Henry Ford idea that it's black, it's a tool to do a job. But the Great Western, it's got to look good as well. There behind the splasher and the nameplate going up to the cab is the reversing reach rod, which actuates the valve gear between the frames, so you can set the engine into forward and reverse and adjust the cut-off that we've talked about before, and above it also the ejector for the vacuum brake system. Moving to the back of the engine itself, looking up at the cab side, 4003, the number, we say remembering that North Star, the first of the engines, was number 40. It was renumbered 4000, and North Star itself was converted into a 460 in 1909. By then the die was set, and the 4000 class, the stars, became what we have here in front of us. We've looked at the outside of this Great Western masterpiece, and it is a gorgeous machine, but what was it like away from the engineering of made it operate and work so well? What was it like for the crews? Let's go and have a look in the cab and see. So away from the mechanics of the engine, the boiler, the motion, the wheels, the running gear, let's have a look inside the cab here. It's not particularly spacious, It's quite open. As with so many engines that we've seen, the driver, if he gets a chance to sit down at all, sits on a flap, a wooden plank, and the same with the fireman, also has a plank, but you know, there is precious little in terms of protection. It's still a weatherboard at the front, a front shield, side of the cab, but you know, no sliding windows, no glass other than that front window, which you can still open if you get a little bit too hot. Warning notice there: do not look over or pass along the side of this cab when near bridges, loading gauges or coal stages. And that was fitted to all Great Western engines, because if you lean out the side of the cab, thus you might, alongside a bridge, tunnel or loading gauge, you might well end up losing your head or certainly getting very seriously injured. It also has on the side, top of the cab there, CDF. That would be the code for Cardiff Canton, probably the engine shed where this would have been based for a time. The Great Western Railway used alphabetical codes, so TYS would be Tyseley, which is Birmingham, LMTN would be Leamington Spa, and so on and so forth. As we so often see on a loco, the big controls are the ones that strike you. So over here, it's a right-hand drive engine. All Great Western engines are right-hand drive, as opposed to LMS, which are on the left, and L&ER. So this is the very large reversing rack with the screw reverse, so it's finely adjustable, with the mid-gear point, and then full forward gear and full back gear, and the ability to adjust in between with this. You could rotate that screw reverse, it would actuate the reversing rod outside, going down to the valve gear and setting the engine in forward or backwards, and then increasing either the power or the efficiency using the reverser as you go. And used in conjunction with the regulator, but it has what's called a pilot valve. It's positioned to get the engine going and working lightly. And this engine is turned out as it would have been from Swindon Works around 1910, and you can see everything is steel, copper or brass, and it's beautifully finished. So what else of this myriad of fittings on the back head of this engine? Well, very important is our water level. Great Western engines only ever had one water gauge glass on the footplate, controlled by a single lever connecting the two cocks together. If you are in absolute trouble and your gauge glass isn't working, you've got tri-cocks where at least you can see where there's water or steam comes out of them, and tells you roughly what's going on in the boiler. Not so assuring as the gauge glass itself, where you can see the level, but something that enables you to at least get home. The boiler pressure gauge here, again beautifully polished and burnished, with a red line for the safety valves set at 225 pounds per square inch, lubs per squinch, there we are. And then below it, the steam heating pressure gauge, because there's a valve goes up there, comes through, and that enables you to heat the train using boiler steam, boiler heat. Other controls that we have, the injector steam valves, the three of them across there, because this engine has an exhaust steam injector. We won't go into the details of how that works, but it does require both of these valves, and then an extra injector valve for the driver's side injector on that side, and the brake valve here for the vacuum, with the valve to operate the ejector itself to create vacuum, and then to actually apply the brake at various gradations, on and off, and then a place called lap in the middle. The blower here to induce draft on the fire when the engine isn't working, or if you're coming up to a bridge or a tunnel, you crack the blower so that you run less risk of a downdraft and blowing the fire back into the cab. While we're talking about brakes, there's also the vacuum gauge, so it tells you what's happening in the main reservoir on the engine and along the train itself. One last piece, we talked about lubrication externally on the engine in terms of the connecting rods and things, but what about lubricating the valves and the pistons and the inside of the engine where it's hot and you can't put corks because you've got steam floating around? This is where this gadget comes in, gizmo. It's called a hydrostatic lubricator, and it has 3 glasses here filled with glycerin. That one says sil for cylinder, that one says spare, and that one says reg for regulator. You fill oil in here, and then you can regulate with various valves on the top. You should screw that back tight, and it's connected to this along the top. This is called a condenser. Steam goes through this and condenses into water, goes into the displacement lubricator, and because the water displaces the oil, you can regulate it using these needle valves at the bottom for the flow. So you want to watch blobs of oil through those glasses at a steady rate, not too fast, not too slow, and that oil is then displaced into the steam circuit and lubricates the regulator and the cylinders and the valves internally. So it's really quite clever, but again, something that all Western mainline engines had. This is the engine that brings the Great Western Railway into the 20th century and sets the standard, not just in engineering, but the look of the Great Western mainline express locomotives until the 1950s. The Star class led on with its house style, not just of looks, but engineering, to the future dynasty of Great Western 460 types. This is where that house style of the Great Western mainline motive power begins. Thanks for joining us today for Curator with a Camera. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not like and subscribe so you don't miss out in the future.